everyone and welcome back. This is 1D Historian and today we are talking about, oh no.
I want you here with me, like how I pictured it, so I don't have to keep imagining.
Today we are talking about the Zayn versus Louis fight in 2015. Now before we begin today, I want to advise you to go get your favorite snack, favorite drink, maybe even something cuddly in a blanket. This is going to be a rough one. Let's get started. Now odds are you have seen this video before.
Couple of weeks now, but you don't really believe it till you get here and you see like everybody stood round together and singing with such great legends that have, you know, done it over the years, and you know the people that he brought up who've been involved in the cause. It's just
take another look.
So anything that stood out from the day while you've been kind of waiting around?
One thing we did realise today is that we have been singing one line of the song wrong for years, but we didn't actually.
Have there been any kind of funny moments or anything?
Like standing there, because obviously, you know, we've known we were doing this for a couple of weeks now, but you don't really believe it till you get here and you see like everybody stood round together and singing with such great legends that have, you know, done it over the years, and you know the people that he brought up who've been involved in the cause. It's just so huge to think that we're here today doing our little bit.
Have there been?
Now back in the day, Harry was a crier and he was notorious for having no poker face. So even if somehow you don't pick up on the other boys' strangely subdued behavior, Harry is a huge clue that something here is very wrong. And sure enough, something was. Just a couple after this interview, One Direction's Facebook page announced that Zayn would be leaving the band in the middle of a world tour so that he could, quote, be a normal 22-year-old. For a while leading up to his departure, there had been a couple of very worrying signs that Zayn's mental health was in trouble. Now we all love the way that Prince Hair Zayn looks, but Prince Hair Zayn happened during this time, and people who are experiencing psychological turmoil tend to be very protective of their hair. Only during this time, Zayn started losing a very obvious amount of weight as if he wasn't eating. A lot of us noticed these things when they were happening, but they became even more obvious after the fact that they were cries for help. You should note that throughout the history of One Direction, Zayn had always struggled with anxiety problems. He struggled with anxiety even before the band existed.
Anyone know where Zayn is?
I actually don't want to do it because I hate dancing and I've never done it before, and I just feel like an idiot on the stage trying to dance with other people that are clearly better than me, and I just feel like an idiot. I'm not doing it.
He was, by his own admission, shy, and even in interviews he tended to stay quieter than the other boys, only answering questions if he was asked directly, as if he was worried that he would say something foolish and embarrass himself.
We're in America as well, while we're in
Malibu.
Miami.
Malibu,
sorry.
You're right, man. Just as well, you got the video back. He's tired.
I've still got jet lag.
Arigato gozaimasu. Gambarimasu.
Konnichiwa.
Pretty good.
I didn't learn anything in Japan.
There were also several times in the band's touring history where at the very last minute right before the show, Zayn did not come out to perform, citing that he was ill, which was most likely stage fright or a panic attack. So when that fateful Facebook announcement was made, everyone lost their minds. I don't think I'm ever going to remember that day without a weight in my chest at the memory. It was easily the darkest day in our fandom. As you can imagine, everybody online was scrambling, making like 1,000 tweets a minute that was just exclamation points and capital letters and key smashes. But just as many people were saying nothing at all, and for a fandom like ours that was constantly active, the silence was a little bit terrifying. Now, even though this was the worst time in the history of our fandom over the next few days, it was also weirdly the most united we had ever been as a fandom, because everyone was feeling the exact same sense of devastation.
Band members leaving Zayn.
What?
Who do you think
Tim!
replaced him?
Did you hear One Direction is breaking up? She just told me.
Are you
Wait,
serious?
what?
When?
Zayn is leaving the band.
Zayn! Zayn is... Time out.
Wait a minute.
I can't do this premiere.
Even casual fans of the band felt it, because even though the other four boys said that they would continue on as One Direction, it wasn't the end of One Direction. It was the end of the One Direction that we all knew and loved. And we weren't naive. Zayn's departure had, for the first time in the band's history, reminded all of us that One Direction had an expiration date. We were also united in the fact that, at first, most fans weren't mad at Zayn for leaving. Heartbroken? Yes. Mad at the situation? Yes. But not mad at Zayn. It wasn't a secret that Zayn had always struggled with the immense fame of the band, so when the departure announcement said that he was leaving because he really wanted to be normal, we all supported it. We knew he had been miserable, and like I've said in all my other videos, Directioners have always only just wanted all the boys to be happy. Were there a lot of people who were mad at Zayn and kept saying things like, oh, how could he do this to us? Yes, of course. But for once, most of us weren't actually fighting with these fans. We took time to validate their hurt and acknowledge the way that they were feeling. But we patiently and gently explained to them that this is what Zayn needed. That he couldn't go on living the way that he had been, and him leaving the band was a lot better than the inevitable alternative. There was so much compassion between Directioners during this time. In fact, one of the cool things that we did was a movement called Carrot for a Day, where basically we suspended any judgment against fans for acting like they were new and cringe, and just kind of encouraged everybody to tweet like they were finding One Direction for the first time, just so that we could relive the old happy days. And a lot of us started feeling really guilty, like the fans were responsible for Zayn's unhappiness because we had made them so popular that management was just constantly overworking them. So we felt guilty. We felt angry with management for always overworking the boys. We felt scared about what did this mean for One Direction as a band. And we were in mourning. And we felt really sensitive to the hurt of the other boys because it became extremely obvious how hurt the other boys were too. You can see that in all the shows and interviews that the boys did in the days following Zayn's departure. Zayn was their friend, and he just left them. It had to hurt. And that hurt turned to total betrayal very soon after, thanks to Naughty Boy. I don't know what he's up to nowadays, but back in 2015, Naughty Boy was a producer who was pretty well known for this Sam Smith song that you may have heard before. And towards the end of 2014, it was reported that Zayn was in the studio working with Naughty Boy. Now this didn't really worry anyone because very often during the 1D days there were rumors that the boys were working on solo projects with other artists or songwriters or producers, and every time there would be like, oh no, is this the end of 1D? Is this person going solo? And it never amounted to anything, so no one really worried when it was said that Zayn was working in the studio with Naughty Boy. And remember that in the One Direction Facebook post that announced Zayn's departure from the band, Zayn cited that the reason he was leaving was because he wanted to be a normal 22-year-old for a bit. And so no one had any sort of suspicion or inkling that he had left to start a solo career because we knew Zayn always struggled with being famous. So if he told us he was leaving because he didn't want to be famous anymore, we had no reason not to trust him. And we also had no reason not to trust him because, like, we're the fans. Why would Zayn lie to us? So anytime people would suggest, like, oh, he's going to start a solo career, we shut it down immediately because we're like, if that was it, Zayn would have told us. Zayn would never have lied to us about why he was leaving the band. He would have told us the truth. So picture this. It is 5 days after Zayn leaves One Direction. Most fans are still in mourning. Some are still in denial. Everybody's still heartbroken and unsure about what's happening and what's going to happen next. And Naughty Boy retweets a tweet that says, Zouis will rise. What is Zouis, you ask? Excellent question. Zouis is another portmanteau, we really like these in this fandom, that mashes up Zayn's name with Naughty Boy's name. Allegedly. Naughty Boy denied that Zouis had anything to do with Zayn Malik. Right. And the reason that Naughty Boy publicly denied that Zouis had anything to do with Zayn was because of none other than Louis William Tomlinson. Now, I've talked before in other videos about how Louis' relationship with the fans has always been something very, very special. Anyone that Louis was mad at, the fans would be mad at, and vice versa. Louis was always the first to jump in and defend the fans to the media, to defend the fans to any haters. Louis was always having our back, and we always had his. So when Naughty Boy seemed to imply that Zayn was starting a solo career, Louis immediately jumped onto Twitter and defended us against him, calling him inconsiderate and telling him to grow up, because he thought Naughty was just trying to make fun of and rile up the fans who were still so upset that Zayn left. It seemed that the fans weren't the only ones that Naughty Boy was trying to rile up, as he indirectly referred to Louis' tweet by saying that time would tell the real story, seeming to imply that there was more to this Naughty and Zayn solo project than was first assumed. And then somehow a few days later, some mysterious person leaked the demo for Zayn's first solo song, I Won't Mind, to YouTube. Now, obviously the fans didn't want to believe it. We didn't want to believe that Zayn had lied to us, and we didn't want to believe that he was already, only 5 days after leaving the band, going solo. Some fans began to speculate that the track was actually a rejected song that was meant to go on One Direction's album 4. This theory was so popular that it even made some mainstream media newspapers. But Louis definitely was not on board with this, as he replied to the article asking if it was a joke, which definitely seemed to confirm that this was never meant to be a One Direction song, and that Zayn actually had recorded it for some kind of solo project. Now, for the rest of the month, Directioner Twitter was kind of in a spiral about the whole thing. It seemed like Naughty Boy was doing exactly what Louis accused him of, and was just trying to rile up the fans by tweeting absolute nonsense. And fans were extra sensitive to this because we were starting to come to the conclusion that Zayn had lied to us. Zayn had lied to everybody about why he had left the band. That was becoming obvious. And all of the fans that had stood behind his decision, all of the fans that had defended him, all of the fans that stood up for him and his right to protect his mental health and well-being, were suddenly realizing that he had lied to us. And he was really just leaving because he wanted to start a solo career. Even worse, it was starting to become obvious that Zayn had also lied about the reason for him leaving to the other boys. The way that Louis kept tweeting and replying to Naughty Boy made it seem pretty clear that Louis was under the impression that Naughty Boy was lying and that Zayn was absolutely not starting a solo career. I need you to imagine two things for me. First, the sense of betrayal that Directioners felt at being lied to after we stood up for this person that we loved so much and trusted so much. And second, how utterly conflicted we felt. Directioners always sided with the boys, but if one boy betrayed the rest, whose side were we supposed to be on? It only got worse because a few days later, Naughty Boy tweeted out this picture of he and Zayn working in the studio. Louis at this point knew all about the feud that had been happening for the last few weeks between Naughty Boy and the Directioners, and so he hit back with a tweet in our defense, knowing that Naughty Boy was only tweeting pictures with Zayn to rile us up. He indirected the picture, saying, "Remember when you were 12 and you used to think those Mac filters for your pictures were cool? Haha, some people still do, ha!" Zayn directly replied Louis' tweet and said, "Remember when you had a life and stopped making bitchy comments about mine?" Up until this point, Zayn had stayed out of it. Up until this point, Louis had been very careful to only talk shit about Naughty Boy and to not bring Zayn into it. But with this tweet, Zayn brought himself into it and now started a direct fight between him and Louis. Louis didn't respond to Zayn, and he and Naughty Boy kept throwing barbs at each other, but Louis never answered this tweet, and Louis never said anything about Zayn specifically. And I think this just goes back to Louis always trying to protect us. As soon as Zayn tweeted this, Directioners had a meltdown, and I think Louis saw how upset we were that he and Zayn were fighting, and he didn't want to make it worse. So he didn't say anything. And Directioners, feeling immensely betrayed that after everything, this was the thing that Zayn was going to say, this was the thing he was going to talk about, he was going to throw shots at Louis, who had been standing up for us for the last 6 weeks while we were in our grief and turmoil and confusion? No, sir. So fans obviously flipped on Zayn as a result of this, telling Zayn that he was acting like an asshole, that he was a liar, that he was a dick, and that he shouldn't be treating Louis this way after they'd been friends for so long. And Zayn tweeted out acting like he was confused, saying, "Why is everybody mad at me? I'm just defending myself." So as a direct result of that tweet, the fandom completely fractured. Some fans agreed that Zayn was just defending himself and said he had a right to defend himself against Louis being petty, while the rest of us weren't so generous. Before 1D even started their hiatus, Zayn started his solo career, and the rest of the boys were constantly asked about this situation in interviews and whether or not they had talked to Zayn and whether or not they were still friendly with Zayn. As I've said a lot before, I do not know any of the boys personally, and I want to be respectful of the fact that I don't know everything that happens in their personal lives, and I can only talk about what we know publicly. So I don't know if Louis and Zayn ever made up, if they ever apologized to one another, or if they are friends today. What we know publicly is that Louis' first solo performance after his mother's tragic death, Louis invited all the boys to be there in order to support him emotionally, including Zayn. He invited Zayn, and Zayn never showed up. Meanwhile, where did the fandom stand with all this? Most of the fans felt like Zayn had lied to us, because in the Facebook post announcing his departure, he said he was leaving to be a normal 22-year-old, and then it seemed as if he was starting a solo career immediately after leaving. But in an interview that he did a couple years later, Zayn implied that the quote that was attributed to him was never actually spoken by him, saying that it was something that the lawyers wrote on his behalf. At the time, us fans had no reason to suspect that he didn't say what the post said he did, which is the reason we felt like he was lying to us. And after Zayn made that statement, it threw into turmoil everything that Directioners thought we knew about the situation. And just about a month after his fight with Louis, Zayn also cut ties with Naughty Boy, telling the producer to stop pretending like they were friends. So if Zayn hadn't left the band to be a normal 22-year-old, and he hadn't left to start a career with Naughty Boy, what on earth was going on? Over the years, Zayn has given us several different answers to the question of why he left One Direction, and I'm going to touch on all of them in this video because I think all of them are relevant and probably played a part in his leaving. Zayn conducted his first solo interview after leaving the band with Zayn Lowe in November of 2015, and this interview was described as a bombshell. Zayn took the opportunity to explain his behaviors over the previous few months and explore on camera for the first time his feelings about life and One Direction. And he said a couple things that were doubly hurtful. Hurtful because he said them, but also hurtful because we were just learning that he was feeling this way. As I've said in just about every single one of my videos, Directioners have only ever wanted the boys to be happy, and the idea that Zayn had been so vociferously unhappy within the band was kind of heartbreaking. And maybe the most hurtful revelation of all?
My heart's already breaking, baby, go on, twist the knife.
So the first reason why Zayn left One Direction was that he never wanted to be in One Direction, and it always made him unhappy. All things considered, though, Zayn stayed very respectful to the other boys in this bombshell interview, never insulting any of them or calling them out for things that they had done in the past, even though he and Louis had so recently had such a public fight. But it didn't stay that way for long. In an interview with Us Weekly, Zayn said that while he and the boys sometimes communicated with one another, they obviously weren't as close as they used to be. And specifically, he said this.
Go on, twist the knife.
Now, fans were very quick with video compilations and collections of Zayn and Harry moments trying to disprove this statement. But could it have been true? I've pointed out in one of my other videos how back in the early days of the band there was a strange tension between Harry and Zayn that, if I had to guess, stemmed from the fact that both of them considered Louis to be their best friend and both wanted to be Louis' favorite.
I'm not doing your thing.
But the tension seemed to have faded quite a bit over the years and even nearly dissolved by the time Zayn left.
So,
Eczema warrior princess.
But please bear in mind that people's emotions are complex, and depending on your mood, the color of a memory can swing dramatically. You can think back on the exact same memory in two different moods, and your resentment and anger would cloud your judgment so that when you look at it in a bad mood, you only think about and remember the bad times. So it is entirely possible that at the time Zayn made this statement, he was feeling so much hurt that to say he and Harry never really talked was true to him, as hard as that might be to hear. But as you can imagine, the fans didn't like hearing this one bit, and fans who were already angry at Zayn were now angrier. And fans were angry because he did this interview around the exact same time as an interview wherein he said that he hated One Direction's music and that it was generic as fuck. Fans perceived this statement as an insult on the boys as a whole, and as I've talked before, the fans always get very defensive of anyone who's insulting the boys, even when the person doing so is one of the boys. And Zayn had cited this generic as fuck music as the reason he left the band, so that he could have more creative control over the music he put out. So reason number 2 why Zayn left One Direction. He wanted to make music that he actually liked. Touching back on us having our sense of loyalty and protectiveness triggered whenever one of the boys insults the other, what we saw happen with Zayn and Harry is exactly what we're seeing happen with Liam and Zayn now. Liam's comments were unacceptable. Zayn's comments were uncalled for. And both of them were lashing out to hurt someone who had hurt them. And Zayn had been hurt for a long time. In an interview he did with Esquire magazine, Zayn admitted that towards the end of his time in the band, he'd struggled with an eating disorder. And eating disorders are very common in people who feel like they don't have any control over their own lives. Food is the one thing they for sure can have control over. And it also came out that behind the scenes of the band, Zayn had been facing an onslaught of racial and Islamophobic abuse. In his autobiography, Zayn described that in the days of the band, the media would often make racially charged comments about him, airport security would discriminate against him, and even some fans would send online hate and abuse that was racially and religiously motivated. And I can't speak to what extent the boys knew about this abuse, but I can say with certainty that before this book came out, the fans genuinely had no idea how bad the racism and Islamophobia was. As hard as that might be to believe, we did not know how bad it was. The other boys in the band had also always gotten a lot of hate from the media and by fans and non-fans alike online. Harry would receive anti-Semitic sentiments every time he posted about Jewish holidays. Louis was constantly called the F-slur. Niall was called a car bomber several times. So hate focused on a particular part of the boys' identity was nothing new, and we saw it all the time. We just didn't see the behind-the-scenes hate that Zayn got that made his so much harder to endure than what the other boys dealt with. And despite the revisionist history that has been going around on this issue for the last several years that says the Directioners did nothing about the Islamophobia and about the racism Zayn faced, I promise you that when we saw the Islamophobia and racism levied against Zayn, we did do things about it, what little it was possible for us to do. Please try to remember that we were children on the internet, whose only power in this situation was in what we could make trend on social media. What is it you wanted us to do? Zayn said in his book that no one ever defended him against Islamophobia and racism. My sister, who was probably the biggest Zayn girl on earth, would come home from school every single day and search Zayn's tag on Twitter so that she could fight with people who were being racist or Islamophobic against him. If no one else in the world was defending Zayn, my sister definitely was. To me and my friends, we're always defending Zayn and hitting back when we saw racist or Islamophobic abuse. Even my friends who weren't Muslim themselves, constantly defending him against the media, against haters, and against so-called fans. When did fans ever defend Zayn against racist vitriol? Well, after a song called Zayn Did 9/11 got released, fans started bringing posters to every single concert that declared Zayn is not a terrorist. As well as we created a petition to get the song removed from the iTunes store and spent days making our disapproval of the song trend worldwide on Twitter. And when American talk show host Bill Maher made these disgusting statements about Zayn on his show...
And where were you during the Boston Marathon?
Fans once again took to Twitter and trended respect for Zayn for days worldwide. As well as we made another petition demanding that the host apologize for his Islamophobic comments. I don't say these things to invalidate Zayn's feelings, because it very likely felt true to Zayn that no one was standing up for him. Because against the entire systemic racism machine, the hate was probably so loud as to drown out the voices of those who were trying to help. What about the other 1D boys, his so-called friends? What was their excuse? The boys have talked before about how their management forbade them from talking about religion, race, or politics because it was deemed too controversial, and their public relations team was worried it might hurt their career. Bad excuse. Not really. Management contracts within the entertainment industry have always been extraordinarily restrictive. Basically, when you sign a management contract, you are agreeing to follow through with whatever it is that management tells you to do. Otherwise, the contract can be immediately terminated because you breached it. In other words, if they tell you you are not allowed to get a haircut, and then you cut your hair, you can lose your entire job as well as your entire reputation within the music industry. Before you think that can't be real, that management has that much control over their lives, consider Halsey. Recently, Halsey was embroiled in a scandal when they revealed that their management wouldn't allow them to release their own song that they owned and created unless they went viral on TikTok first. Halsey is a grown adult with a child. If management has this much control over Halsey, how much more so especially for a young kid who doesn't know anything and who's doing what they're told because they are terrified that they will lose their dream job. Management told One Direction they were not allowed to talk about race, religion, and politics. And they had to listen, so they did. Zayn didn't even talk about what he was experiencing while he was experiencing it, because he wasn't allowed to. He was suffering immensely in total silence because he wasn't allowed to stand up for himself. Unfortunately, the racial and Islamophobic abuse didn't end when Zayn left the band. Racism and Islamophobia are two features of Western life that are baked pretty deep into the social fabric of predominantly white European-descended nations. And that includes being baked deep into the Western mainstream music industry. After Zayn released his music video for his song Like I Would, rapper Azalea Banks went on a racist rant against him, calling him a terrorist, among other vile slurs. So reason number 3 for leaving One Direction: Zayn was very often the target of racially and religiously motivated discrimination and hatred, and he did not feel like the support he was given was enough to combat the hate, particularly because public support was heavily restricted by a publicity team. He left because he could no longer bear that abuse. So to sum up, at this time, all of the boys, no matter what age they were on paper, were overwhelmed children who were emotionally stunted by early pop stardom. Zayn struggled with anxiety on top of that. After being overwhelmed by a series of things that especially included racism and Islamophobia, Zayn was forced to leave a situation that was literally starting to kill him. Naughty Boy took advantage of an emotionally compromised child by trying to force him into starting a solo career that he was not ready for, which caused him to betray his friends and his fans. And his fellow bandmates felt that betrayal acutely. His closest friend most likely felt that betrayal the strongest, especially after their fight. And to this day, it seems that neither Louis nor Zayn have been able to process their feelings in a healthy way that allows for forgiveness and closure. Fans struggled to reconcile what we had been told about Zayn's departure versus what it looked like to us, because we were never told the extent of the racism he faced behind the scenes since he wasn't allowed to talk about it. Fans defended Zayn against racism and Islamophobia, but we were kids who didn't know what to do, and what we did turned out to be woefully inadequate. Zayn lashed out and insulted Harry. Liam lashed out and insulted Zayn. Every single person in this entire situation fucked up, because every single person in this entire situation was an emotionally immature kid who was hurt and just trying to do their best to manage their feelings in a world that at the end of the day is cold, cruel, and unforgiving of the fame monster. I guess the closest thing that we can come to a happy ending in this was that a couple days ago, Zayn posted a video to Instagram of him singing a One Direction song. And Louis liked it.
I wasn't just liking it for the sake of liking it. It was a nice feeling because, you know, in the past he said what he said about the band, and I understand some of what he was saying. And those videos, it showed he was reflecting. It showed he was thinking about those times.
So it seems that after all this time, there is still love and support between those boys, to whatever extent and in whatever form. So boy, oh boy, do I have an addendum. When I made this video, it was a year and a half ago now, and I never, ever, ever thought I would get to say that we have updates on the Zayn and Louis drama, but we have had so many updates. It is the year of our Lord 2023. What is happening? So to start with, Zayn posted another One Direction song. This time it was a video of himself singing Night Changes. Very slow, very melodic, very lullaby-ish.
Even when the night changes, it will never change me and you.
His voice sounded amazing as always. And only a couple weeks after he posted a video of himself singing Night Changes, Louis Tomlinson added himself singing a cover of Night Changes to his live concert set list. There were no survivors. Especially because it was so clear and so obvious that Louis singing this song was a direct response to Zayn singing it. Louis Tomlinson released his new album Faith in the Future that fall, and many fans believe that his songs Chicago and or Holding On to Heartbreak are actually about Zayn. Myself included.
I think in time. The thing is, we just have to bump into each other.
Louis also spoke in an interview during the promo season for that album about Zayn when he was asked,
Are we friends? You'd have to ask him. Like, there's been numerous times over the last couple of years where I've thought about him and hoped he's alright.
Just this year, just a couple months ago actually, Zayn put out a new single for the first time in ages, which was very exciting. And in a post announcing the song's existence, bandmate Liam Payne commented, and Zayn replied to the comment, which caused the entire world to melt down. As part of promo for his new music, Zayn did an interview with the Call Her Daddy podcast. He gave yet another reason why he left the band, and it was a brand new reason.
There was a lot of politics going on. Certain people were doing certain things, certain people didn't want to sign contracts. So I knew something was happening. So I just got ahead of the curve. If I'm being honest with you, I was like, I'm just going to get out of here. I think this is done. And I just seen it. And I completely selfishly wanted to be the first person to go and make my own record, if I'm being completely honest. Then there was obviously underlying issues like within our friendships too. We'd been together every day for 5 years and we'd got sick of each other.
This left a lot of people feeling very conflicted because once again we're left to wonder, what was the truth? Why did he really leave? Was it for an emotional reason or a career reason or what? Then just a couple weeks ago, a fan had posted some footage of Louis performing on tour, and Zayn liked the post. It was a fan's post about Louis and not a Louis post, but it was still notable. And then in September 2023, just a couple days ago, Louis Tomlinson commented on a post that Zayn made on Instagram, publicly wishing his daughter Kai a happy birthday. Significantly, Zayn did not respond to or even acknowledge this comment with a like. So as far as we know, Zayn and Louis have still not formally made up, and they seem to be playing a game of tag. It doesn't seem like either of them have apologized yet. It does not seem like they have had that conversation that is long overdue between them to discuss what happened in the past and to start the healing process. All we can do as fans is speculate and wait and